Hello, my name is Chuck Moses, and I would like to talk to you today about integrated pest management, or IPM, and the use of pesticides in indoor marijuana grow, cultivation, and greenhouse facilities. Marijuana cultivation facilities are now legal in many states. There is an ongoing need to manage pests in these facilities, which occasionally calls for the use of a pesticide product. Since the federal government considers marijuana to be a drug and not a crop, it is up to the individual state agency to develop a rule on the use of pesticide products in these facilities. Although my experience is in the state of Nevada, I have found that Nevada rules on pesticide use are more stringent than most states, except those which prohibit the use of pesticide products altogether. You will have to check with the state jurisdiction where you work to determine what the pesticide rules are. For this reason, this presentation is a general overview of pesticide safety and laws, pest control techniques, and a discussion of pesticide labels. Many cultivation managers who are starting these businesses for the first time are surprised by the number of pest issues which are regular problems, especially when growing plants indoors. A pest is anything that competes with, injures, or spreads disease to humans, domestic animals, desirable plants, structures, or possessions. Specifically, there are a number of insect and disease problems which occur because of humidity and warm temperatures. Crowding of plants in these facilities also contribute to the development of pest problems in indoor growing environments. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, also known as FIFRA, is the federal law which regulates the use, sale, distribution, and manufacturing of pesticides in the United States. The law is administered by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and the EPA has designated state agencies in each state to enforce this federal law. States must develop state laws which are at least as stringent as FIFRA. FIFRA defines a pesticide as any substance or mixture of substances designed to prevent, control, repel, or mitigate any pest. It includes insect and plant growth regulators, insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, and other products, many of which are not normally thought to be a pesticide. The easiest way to determine if a chemical product is regulated as a pesticide is to look at the label on the container and determine if there are pesticidal claims. Pesticidal claims include kill, control, and prevent a pest, although there are other terms which would fit into the pesticide category. Animal drugs and antibacterial hand soaps are examples of products that do make pesticidal claims but are regulated by the Federal Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, not EPA. In some cases, there are implied claims, internet literature, or simply a chemical which has no other use except for a pesticide. FIFRA further classifies pesticides as either general or restricted use. A general use pesticide is a product which is not likely to harm human health or the environment if it is applied according to label directions. These pesticide products can be purchased almost anywhere, and a user does not need a special certification in order to apply the product. Most products used in grow facilities are classified as general use. On the other hand, a restricted use pesticide, or RUP, may cause harm to human health or the environment. unless it is applied by a certified competent applicator. Certification means specialized training and, in most cases, competency testing to assure an applicator has the knowledge to apply a RUP safely. Certification is required in all states for restricted use pesticide applicators. Most states offer an option for certification, which is to self-study by reviewing a study manual and then scheduling an examination once you are familiar with the study material. Certification can also be accomplished through live training opportunities, although testing is required for first-time certification. Applicators can then renew their certificates by attending classes for continuing education credits, or CEUs. Internet classes can also be taken for continuing education credit, and courses must meet state CEU credit requirements. Even though most pesticides used in grow facilities are not RUPs, it is important that grow facility managers become certified to demonstrate professionalism and increase their knowledge. Certification is also required to conduct training under the Federal Worker Protection Standard, which I will mention later. Pesticide certification requirements for restricted use pesticide RUP applicators were revised recently by the U.S. EPA. Many of these provisions are already in place at the state level. State provisions must be at least as stringent as federal rules, and states have the flexibility of making rules which are more stringent than what the federal government requires. So you will need to determine if the state regulatory agency has rules that go above and beyond those regulations recently changed by EPA. Changes include a minimum age of 18 for all pesticide applicators, or those persons working under their supervision. Persons working under the supervision of a certified applicator must meet minimum training standards. This could be WPS training, which I will talk about later. Persons taking certification exams must present positive identification when applying to take competency examinations or to attend continuing education training. Applicators and dealerships which sell restricted use pesticides must keep records for 2 years, and they need to be available for the state regulatory agency to inspect. Before we can talk about the use of pesticides, we must first discuss pest control strategies, which are different for each pest and pest situation. Integrated pest management, or IPM, is a pest management strategy which can be employed in any pest control situation. Intelligent pest management means using environmentally safe, effective, and economically viable methods to develop a long-term pest control strategy, not one which focuses on the short-term pest control situation. In other words, IPM is a combination, not just one, of pest control tactics incorporated into a single plan or strategy to reduce pests. IPM is not a no pesticide approach to pest control. Pesticides are an important tool in our pest control toolbox. However, it is important to recognize that the application of a pesticide by itself is a short-term approach. When a pest problem arises and the pest is treated, the pest is controlled only for a short period of time. If environmental conditions do not change, the pest problem will arise again. Chemical control will then be required again, the process repeated, or otherwise known as getting on the pesticide treadmill. Over time, pests have been known to become resistant to chemicals from overuse, effectively removing a valuable tool in our IPM toolbox. So, what is the first step in the IPM process? The first step is to properly identify the pest we are trying to control. Note that I use the term control and not eliminate or exterminate a pest, which we know now is not a realistic pest control goal. If we do not know the exact identity of the pest we are trying to control, then we cannot employ the correct pest control strategy. This chart is a partial list of insects which infest cannabis. A thorough visual inspection of the plant will reveal the presence or absence of these pests because they infest different parts of the plant. Many believe that since cannabis is an exotic species, they think that there are few domestic pests that could become a problem for growers. These individuals find out in short order that this assumption is incorrect. Once an identification has been made, then it is important to set an economic threshold or a point where the population reaches a certain level and control is necessary. Monitoring is essentially counting the number of individuals that exist. Monitoring is also required afterwards to determine if our pest control strategy is effective. By establishing an economic threshold, we can then make a determination if control is necessary. In some situations, pests are aesthetic and don't result in a reduction of plant health. Once you determine that control is necessary, you are then required to have a list of all control options, not just chemical, and you will then evaluate the benefits and risks of each. Don't wait until the pest becomes a problem to take action. The best option may be one which can be employed before the pest becomes a problem, a preventative approach. By employing a non chemical option, we can be assured that we are utilizing the least toxic approach. Monitoring pest populations or results after we employ our pest control strategy is important to evaluate the treatment and then fine tune our strategy. Once we identify an effective strategy, we must then educate everyone involved to help keep pest populations from exploding. This is especially important in ensuring that a facility remains sanitary and clean, denying pests of the conditions which result in population growth. And these are food, water, and harborage. We can control insects by reducing the availability of food, water, and shelter, a sanitary measure which is considered to be preventative. Cultural control measures include maintenance of plant health and also includes reduced plant crowding, which will increase aeration and decrease excessively moist conditions. Mechanical control measures include hand removal of pests and disposal of infected plant material. The use of host or pest resistant material is again another preventative measure that discourages the development of pest populations. Biological control is the use of predators and or parasites which exist in the pest's natural environment. An example of a biological control is the use of predatory mites to control mite species which are considered to be pests. Chemical control suppresses a pest population for only a short period of time. In most cases, not all individuals of a pest population are killed. Eventually, if no other pest control strategies are employed, the pest population will build up again in a short period of time, and the surviving individuals will be resistant to the pesticide product we use. IPM control options that we select should be the one or a combination of options which result in the least harm to the environment, risk to the applicator, or harm to the consumer. We do need to consider the cost of the most desirable option or options, but this should not be the only reason for selecting a pesticide. Too many times we select an option or a pesticide product which is cheap but is not the best or most effective alternative for the pest problem that we are dealing with. This picture represents the IPM action pyramid. For any pest control decision you are required to make, you would start at the bottom and work your way up. You need to remember to start the decision-making process before pest populations become too high and limit your options to chemical control. Cultural control measures can be our most effective option in many situations. I mentioned the importance of sanitation in grow facilities. Excluding the introduction of pests in the first place, sanitation is almost as important. Regular maintenance and cleaning of grow rooms and communicating good sanitary practices to staff will be part of your cultural approach. Sticky traps and physical barriers are really exclusionary protections, but are considered to be a physical or mechanical approach. When pests exist in small numbers, a vacuum cleaner can actually be effective if pests are visible to the naked eye. A mechanical approach includes physically removing a pest or discarding infected plants. Glue boards are an effective control measure for controlling fungus gnats. Biological controls include the use of parasitic mice. Keep in mind, when employing biological control methods, there is usually a time lag between the time pest populations grow and the beneficial control agents increase in population. In other words, you won't see much of a difference in control until the beneficial population grows to the same level of the pest population. As I mentioned earlier, chemicals are an important option in an IPM program. If pest populations are low, reduced risk pesticides can be effective and may cost less than conventional pesticides. In most instances, there is less risk to the applicator and consumer, and PPE, personal protective equipment requirements, are minimal. Many of the FIFRA 25B exempted products fall into this category and include oils which serve as protectants and repellents. Insect growth regulators are pest specific in some cases. If reduced risk or lower toxicity products are not effective, then it will be necessary to employ conventional pesticide products, which are more hazardous and require extra safety measures be taken. These safety measures are described on the pesticide label. When a pest control strategy fails, it can usually be attributed to one of the factors listed here. Growers that utilize a chemical control measure assume that if a failure occurs, it is because the chemicals must be bad. This is rarely the case. Investigations into these failures usually indicate that the timing of the application was incorrect. Improper identification of the pest and not using the proper dilution rates could be a reason for the failure as well. I mentioned that the pest resistance is a real possibility if we use the same or similar classifications of pesticides over and over again. Pests which survive these applications will reproduce and their offspring will be resistant as well. Our primary pesticide safety goal is to protect human health and the environment. Once we make a decision to use a pesticide product, then we must follow label directions and any other specific requirements established by the state regulatory agency. By doing this, we will be protecting human and environmental health, and we will ensure that pesticides are not removed from our toolbox because of pesticide misuse. Although federal pesticide rules apply to all 50 states, pesticide rules in each state are different for grow facilities. This is because the EPA considers marijuana to be a drug and not a crop. Therefore, there are no federally registered pesticide products that are approved for use on marijuana. When state legislatures passed marijuana laws legalizing both medical and recreational uses, it became the state's responsibility to create pesticide use rules. For this reason, states have developed their own list of approved pesticide products. At least one state agency prohibits pesticide use on medical marijuana unless special conditions exist. A rule which is the same in all states is that all pesticides must be used according to label directions. You will need to check with your state regulatory agency to determine which pesticides are approved for use on medical and or recreational marijuana. Pesticide use information can be found on the regulating agency's website. Not only can you find information about getting certified to use or supervise the use of restricted use pesticides, you can find the most current list of pesticide products approved for use on medical marijuana indoors. Although cultivation of medical and recreational marijuana have been legalized in many states, medical marijuana presents a unique challenge. Patients who use marijuana products already have health issues, so we do not want significant pesticide residues to add to their discomfort. Since research has been prohibited for many years in this country, there is very little risk information available to determine what level of pesticide residue is safe to consume. For this reason, many states allow the use of pesticide products on EPA's 25B active ingredient list, which are also known as reduced risk pesticides. These products are exempted from registration and exempted from tolerance requirements established for food products. Of course, this criteria does not give us much risk information if the consumer chooses to inhale or smoke the product. By making sure the product is labeled for greenhouse use, this adds another safety measure for cultivation facility workers, since EPA does have some risk information of pesticide products which are used in greenhouse facilities already. States that allow the use of pesticide products exempted from the federal registration requirements can be added to most pesticide lists. These products include FIFRA 25B products and include plant protectants such as mint oil and corn oil. Most states allow the use of FIFRA 25B products in marijuana cultivation facilities because they are considered to be reduced risk and are exempted from pesticide tolerance requirements. A pesticide tolerance is the amount of pesticide residue which is allowed on a crop at the time of harvest. If pesticide residue is present at a level below the established tolerance level, the crop products can be safely consumed. For all pesticide products which can legally be used on crops that aren't exempted from the tolerance requirement, These products can be used providing they are labeled for use in a commercial greenhouse. As stated earlier in this presentation, I spoke about the fact that EPA has not allowed registered pesticide products to include marijuana on the label. Since 25B products are not registered but exempted, many of these product labels do state that they can be used on cannabis. This label is an example of one of those products. As you can see, it includes an active ingredient which is exempted from pesticide registration, and it specifies that it can be used on marijuana and industrial hemp. Up to this point in the presentation, I have not mentioned industrial hemp, a close relative of marijuana, because up to now the presentation addresses primarily the indoor use of pesticide, and industrial hemp is primarily grown outside. Since hemp is cultivated outdoors and was grown primarily for industrial uses, which is not the primary use now, by the way, EPA has registered some products with industrial hemp on the label. I will say a few words about this at the end of the presentation. Many states will require product testing immediately after harvest to determine if there is illegal residue on the plant or to determine if pesticide residue exceeds an established action level. A state established action level is similar to a pesticide tolerance level, which is established by EPA for pesticide residues on food. If pesticide residues do not exceed a tolerance or action level, then the product can be safe to consume. Pesticide residues should not exceed a tolerance or action letter if the pesticide applicator follows pesticide label instructions. An additional measure that a pesticide applicator can take is to use the lowest rate of application specified on the product label, and use the pesticide very early in the grow cycle, only in the vegetative stage. An easy way to tell if the greenhouse product you are planning to use is approved for commercial use is to look for the Worker Protection Reference Statement, also known as the agricultural use box on the pesticide label. This is a copy of the agricultural use box from a pesticide label. The product references the Federal Worker Protection Standard, or WPS. Applicators who apply pesticides in greenhouses, and this term, by the way, now includes warehouses, must comply with the Federal Worker Protection Standard. The provisions of the WPS will be discussed in another presentation, so an applicator needs to determine what the specific provisions of the WPS are prior to using a registered pesticide product. Products considered to be fit for 25B exempted pesticides are also exempted from the WPS. Other information which can be found in the agricultural use box is the required re-entry interval after plants are treated and the personal protection that a person must wear while mixing, loading, and applying pesticides. The EPA also finalized revisions to the Federal Worker Protection Standard in 2016. Programs have been in place since the original WPS was enacted in August of 1992. State programs that are in place at the state level have been determined to be equivalent, and the goals of the Worker Safety Program are the same. These goals are to eliminate and reduce pesticide exposure to all employees working in pesticide treated areas, not just protections for handlers, but for workers as well. Mitigation and protective measures must be put in place by agricultural employers to reduce pesticide exposure in the workplace, and the workplace must inform employees about the hazards of pesticides through notification and implementation of a training program. All EPA registered agricultural pesticides, which are labeled for commercial use in farms, forests, nurseries, and greenhouses, must make reference to the Worker Protection Standard on the pesticide label. The WPS is enforceable at the present time. By referencing the WPS on the pesticide label, the WPS becomes part of the label. Although an agricultural employer will not be able to find the specific provisions of the WPS listed on the pesticide label, it will be up to he or she to seek a consultation with the state regulatory agency which enforces these provisions, or to obtain a copy of the EPA How to Comply manual from the EPA to find out how to comply. Information on the WPS and on state regulatory requirements can easily be found on the internet. EPA's PERC webpage is the best resource to start with for federal rules. The address for the Pesticide Education Resource Collaborative, or PERC, can be found at the top of this slide. Make sure you remember this acronym so that you can find the website easier on your web browser. One of the major provisions made to the WPS included changing the definition of a greenhouse to include the term warehouse. Many indoor marijuana grow facilities utilize warehouses because operators can meet security measures required by the state regulatory agency, and the warehouse can be adopted to grow marijuana plants through a series of environmental controls, which include artificial lighting, ventilation, irrigation and temperature, and relative humidity control. Lighting conditions can be artificially controlled to represent day and night conditions, which stimulate vegetative and reproductive growth during the plant growing cycle. Since EPA has delegated enforcement of the WPS to the state regulatory agency in most states, the state regulatory agency will, in many cases, offer an opportunity for operators to come in compliance through the consultation process. Private consultants may offer this service as well. It is up to the individual grow facility manager to contact the state regulatory agency to request this consultation prior to the time pesticide applications will take place in the facility. The WPS provision must be in place prior to the time any pesticide applications take place. An operator cannot request a consultation after a use investigation or inspection is initiated because the state regulatory agency is in the enforcement mode and must follow its regulatory procedures, which normally involves collection of evidence when violations occur and assessing of regulatory penalties when violations exist. Although a grow facility manager can develop a WPS compliance program on his or her own, if assistance is needed, it is much better to seek this assistance than to wait for an inspection or an investigation to occur. Initially, the grow facility will need to develop a training program which needs to be in place as soon as facility workers and handlers are hired. Any employee who applies pesticides or performs handling tasks known as pesticide handlers or performs cultural tasks known as workers must receive training prior to the time any pesticide spraying takes place. Persons who conduct the training must be a certified applicator or must complete an EPA approved Train the Trainer program. Training must be done annually and only U.S. EPA approved training materials must be utilized. These materials can be found on the PERC website. Training records must be kept on site and be available for inspection. These include signed attendance rosters and verification forms, which must be signed by all workers and handlers that state they understand the materials presented. The training must be offered in a language that all workers can understand, many who may not speak English. Training verification cards can be offered at the conclusion of the training but are not required. After training has been completed, the next most important part of the WPS is the notification requirement. Every facility must designate a central location where employees can find out how to protect themselves from pesticide residue and to get information about pesticide applications in the facility. This central location contains all the required elements of the central posting area. The most important item is the worker safety poster, which is in both Spanish and English language. Employers must use the version developed by EPA and must make sure the name and phone number of the closest emergency medical facility is written in at the bottom. The phone is not required if cell service is available, which is not always the case in rural areas. The application detail sheet must include information on every pesticide application which was performed over the last 30 days. After 30 days, the information can be taken down and kept on file for 2 years. Pesticide application information, which must be recorded, include date of application, target pest, specific treatment location, active ingredient applied, brand or product name, EPA registration number, size of area treated, total amount of product used, applicator name, and the re-entry interval, which can be found on the pesticide label. The re-entry interval can usually be found in the agricultural use box in the Worker Protection Reference Statement. The REI is the period of time which all unprotected persons must stay out of the treated area to avoid exposure to pesticide residue which is present during that time. The revised WPS now requires that safety data sheets, or SDS, be present at the central location. Labels of pesticide products are not required by the WPS at the central location, but most likely are required by state and federal OSHA rules. One thing to keep in mind is that even though you may want to utilize the services of a custom pest control operator in your facility to avoid having to deal with pesticide rules, you are still required to post the pesticide information sheet at the central location. The custom applicator is required to exchange written application details with the employer so that the information can be posted at the central location. All treated areas must be posted with approved EPA signage with the exact signage and dimensions specified. This can be ordered through a number of agricultural supply houses. For indoor pesticide applications, if the REI specified on the pesticide label is equal to or greater than 4 hours, then the sign must be used. If less than 4 hours, oral notification can be given to workers to stay out of treated areas until the re-entry interval has expired. Employers are required to supply any and all personal protective equipment, or PPE, to handlers for any pesticide product used in their facility. Pesticide label instructions must be followed, and those items of PPE must be worn when mixing, loading, applying, or cleaning equipment. In other words, anytime a pesticide applicator is performing a task which would place that person in direct contact with pesticide or pesticide residue. PPE includes many of the items you see here. Not only do these items have to be made available, they have to be in good working order and kept clean if they are to be reused. One of the reasons it is a good idea to use disposable articles of PPE is that it saves an employee or an employer the extra step of keeping PPE clean and inspecting/maintaining these items after they are used. Obviously, the respirator in this photo is not properly maintained. As you can see, all elements of PPE pictured here are also worn out, with the possible exception of the pesticide goggles. One additional WPS change is that OSHA standards will be adopted concerning respirator usage that require fit testing and a physical examination to be completed biannually. I will say a little bit more about this in the next slide. At this time, I need to say a few words about pesticide respirators, especially if any of the pesticide products you use in your grow facility require the use of a pesticide respirator. The filtering mask on the right is not a NIOSH approved pesticide respirator designed to protect a pesticide applicator from organic pesticide vapors. If the pesticide label requires the use of a NIOSH approved organic vapor respirator, then there are a number of options available based on a number of specific factors or conditions which exist at a cultivation facility. This half-face respirator on the left with the correct color coding, which is black, for most organic pesticide vapors, meets the NIOSH requirements providing the operator does not have facial hair preventing a good seal. The revised Worker Protection Standard now requires pesticide applicators to not only use respiratory protection specified by the label, but they also must meet Occupational Safety and Health Administration OSHA respirator safety requirements under the Federal Hazard Communications Standard. Written records must be kept at the facility to demonstrate all the respirator safety requirements have been met for all pesticide handlers who are required to wear a respirator. In addition, facilities must have a written respiratory safety plan. Persons who use respirators must have a physical examination and be trained in the proper use of a pesticide respirator. Respirators must be fit tested, and if they are reusable, be maintained, cleaned, and kept in good working order. Finally, a decontamination station must be located within a quarter-mile of a pesticide application site or area. This is usually not a problem for indoor grow facilities. In most cases, the decontamination area is in the locker room or washroom. Specific items required at the decontamination site includes clean running or potable water, single-use paper towels, and soap. A disposable suit also needs to be present for a pesticide handler if pesticides are spilled onto his or her clothing. If a pesticide label requires the use of a protective eyewear such as goggles, an eye wash station needs to be present at the decontamination site. This presentation is divided into two parts. We are taking a break from the presentation to take a practice quiz designed to test your knowledge of the material we have covered thus far. If you cannot answer these questions, you should reread Part 1 and take the practice quiz again.